Democracy at Stake. So the discussion is actually a part of the lecture series organized by the Global Campus Asia Pacific Master of Arts in Human Rights and Democratization, Regional Campus Universitas Gadjah Mada. And before we start, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Alia, and currently I'm working as a researcher in the Research Center of Politics and Government, or POGOP. And actually, I was the APMA student myself for batch 2020. So actually, I'm very happy to be a part of to this discussion. And today, I will be the moderator for the discussion, which is titled Democracy at Stake, Case of Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste and Indonesia. And for the lecture, I want to introduce you to our two speakers. The first one, we have Mr. Martino Germano da Silva Gusmao. Currently, Mr. Martino is serving as the advisor to the President of the Republic on the Human Fraternity, Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, and he's also the co-founder and also the national coordinator of Forum Interreligioso, or FIR, with the expertise of human rights and interreligion studies and peacekeeping. And for our second speaker, we have Professor Purwo Santoso, or we familiarly greet him with Pak Purwo. Pak Purwo is currently work as the senior lecturer in the Department of Politics and Government, Universitas Gadjah Mada. He finished his PhD studies in government with a special reference on environmental policy making at London School of Economic and Political Sciences, or LSE, in 1999, with his main research expertise and teaching on governance, social welfare, public policy, and border studies. And for our discussion today, we will talk about the context of democracy in Timor-Leste and Indonesia, especially when it is related with the natural resource management. Because this is actually very interesting, because both Indonesia and Timor-Leste are known as a country which has the high natural resources, especially in oil mining sector, which contribute a high percentage of the total state revenue. But despite of the beneficial situation, it always left us a question whether this good or rich resourceful country, can they manage to become a country which has the high degree of democracy, or is it this resourceful situation has managed to decline the degree of democracy of the country? So that's why before we start, I would like to give you the short overview for today's discussion. And the presentation will be started by the presentation given by Mr. Martino about the case of Timor-Leste, and then it will be followed by the presentation from Pak Purwo, and then it will be continued by the discussion with the question and answer. So if you have a question later on, for all the audiences, you can raise your hand using the function button in the bottom of your screen, or you can type down your question in the chat box later. And also, this lecture actually also live stream on YouTube. So if maybe your friend or colleagues will be interested to join the discussion but not managed to join via Zoom, they can actually also join using the YouTube channel, and we may as well having the question from the platform. And now, without further ado, we would like to welcome Mr. Martino Germano da Silva Gusmao to present the presentation about the case of Timor-Leste. So, Mr. Martino, the time is yours. Mr. Martino, could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Alia, for your kindness to moderate this. And first of all, I would thank the Gadjah Mada University for inviting me to join this session. It is a delight for me to share what I understand about Timor-Leste in somehow with Indonesia too. So the topic is to talk about democracy in Timor-Leste. As we know, talk about the democracy, we must start by constitution. So I will start with the constitution of Timor-Leste, to see how we define democracy in our country and how we proceed in practice. Next slide, please. So in the Constitution, we say this in Portuguese. Actually, the Constitution written in Portuguese, but I translate plainly. In Constitution, it is stated that plainly aware of the need to build a democratic culture and proper institutional of the rule of law, wherein the respect for the Constitution, laws, and institution democratically elected are unquestionable basis. So this is the norm and the value which we adopt in our Constitution. Next, please. The other side, democracy also defined as the system and functional. It is in Constitution still, in the preamble, it is stated to ensure the principle of separation of powers in the organization of the state and establish the essential rules of pluralist democracy. So we have two kind of saying about democracy. One is culture of, democratic culture, and the second is pluralist democracy. Now, in the Constitution, it is said the principle of separation. Please be attentive with this. In the theory, we have two way of approach of the Constitution. That is the theory of separation of the powers and distribution of power. These two way of seeing the Constitution must be complemented. The first one, if we say it is distribution of power, it means that the source of democracy is laid within the Constitution. And the Constitution already like filing our rooms in four. That is a President of Republic, National Parliament, Government, and Court. Within these four compartments, we laid every powers to each one. So President of Republic as the head of state, National Parliament, which is the place for political decision maker, the government is executive body, and the court as the judiciary. Though we have this separation theory, we still maintain the interdependency of power. One must be depend to the other in order to run all this pluralist democracy. And also we have the position for democratic opposition. We don't simply say that it is opposition, but we say that democratic opposition. So I just put roughly how Constitution define the democracy in our country. Next, please. I must go very quickly because it is not the sentence. Now, it is very clear in the Constitution when we state democratic culture, it is the spirit of the nation. In French, when Montesquieu stated "Spirit d'une nation," in there you find this is the formulation, the construction of a just and prosperous nation and the development of a solidary and fraternal society. So it is already put in the Constitution to run this nation as a fraternal and solidary society. That's why when Pope Francis and Grand Imam Al-Tayeb signed the agreement in Abu Dhabi, the President of the Republic welcomed this effort, since we see that between the leader of Muslim and Catholic, they have the same intention, the same vision to how to build the nation in this world of today. So from this formulation, we find a double sense of Constitution. First, when you say from economy, the Constitution states that the construction of justice and prosperity. This is the spirit of how we adopt the economy in our nation. Secondly, from social sociocultural, we adopt a principle of solidarity and fraternity. We will go further to this point. Next, please. Now, since the president adopted this fraternity as the new start for developing our nation, I am appointed to work on this. Does paradigm shift of fraternity, does it work in Timor-Leste? This is the big question which President of Republic put in front, or I mean, put on my desk to find every effort how to deal with fraternity in the teaching of Catholic Church, in the teaching of Islam, and all the religion, and also in our constitution, how to make it contextual, how make it, shifted in our nation building and state building. Now, if I go through within these 20 years of our restoration of independence, I found out these 4 cases in Timor-Leste. First, politically, I must be honest to say that we are from fragile state to failed state. The culmination of this statement came when in 19 May 2019, we face how, we share this power, we distribute this power, we separate this power in our constitution, become a very big damage, very big contradiction in our society of today. Let me say one thing about 19 May 2019. We are facing, the pandemic, COVID-19. Meanwhile, we still have the problem how to transfer the power from one government to another. This is the fail of transferring the power. In meantime, there are 2 coalitions to come together, and president must choose one to become, head of state, head of the government, executive. The president take very long time, very huge space and time to decide and leave the country in paralyzing. By the end, one coalition come to robe, the process of transferring democracy, democratically. So if you see that case, when Fretilin, the party, Fretilin, Punto, and PLP joined with the president, they simply denied the other coalition to hand over the power. So, and then they just go to the parliament and just using violence to just, with the force, to take the chair of the parliament. And the next day, the president immediately, appointed the new government without consultation to each other. This is the moment which every time, every process, every step we take to, for power transformation become a kind of, as I say here, we are no longer to take a debate to handle our country, and we just go to use violence. What I take from the Pope is like this: political life no longer has to do with healthy debates about long-term plan to improve people's lives and to advance the common good, but only with slick marketing techniques, primarily aimed to discrediting others. So this is the situation in our political arena. Secondly, socially, we are fragmented. For a society becomes ever more globalized, it makes us neighbors, but does not make us brothers and sisters. The case is like COVID-19. Everybody closed in their own splendid isolation, and no one cares of the other. If you live, it's okay. If you die, it is fine. So this is the way during these 2 years, after 19 to 22, the society is more fragmented, the society more split. Even if through Facebook, through every media, you can contact with everybody in Indonesia, in England, in Portugal, in Australia, everywhere. We can exchange all information, but it doesn't make us feel that we have brother and sister who suffered in this way of pandemic. The fourth is cultural colonization. People that abandon their tradition and they either from a crazy to meaning other or to foment violence or from unpardonable negligence or apathy, allow others to rob their very soul, end up losing not only their spiritual identity, but also their moral consistency, and in the end, their intellectual, economic and political independence. I put this Kunto and martial arts and sects. I just focus on this party, Kunto. You see, this party is part of the coalition. First, they joined the first coalition, and then after they swear here, they take oath there. After that, they run to another coalition. Now, they are the pinpoint where depend on their desire, their need. All two big parties like feedless. They follow whatever this party wants. And incredible that this party with very, very poor resource, they insist to the coalition to get like 10, 12 chair in the government. And it is incredible that the big party allow this small party to mess up everything in the process. Why do that? This party is very strong because they use the traditional oath, drink blood, and just terrorize people that if you don't choose this party, you will die like dog, say for instance. And this party is like working through, they manage everything, and the democracy as if we watching in Jawa, maybe you say that dagelang politik, or you say Srimulat politik, I don't know. But this is funny one in Timor-Leste. And they use the value and norm of tradition to, like terrorize the simple people, the poor people, and suck their blood to do such a political interest. And they go to the corruption as if, not only system, but also real economical interest very strong here. The last case, economically, Timor-Leste is faced new form of poverty are emerging. The claim that the modern world has reduced poverty is made by measuring poverty with criteria from the past that do not correspond to present day. Poverty must always be understood and gauged in the context of actual opportunities available in each concrete historical period. Now I give the case. Many young people in Timor-Leste, after they are graduated, they just make a huge exodus to Portugal, Europe, Australia, Middle East, and Korea with very minimal skill to work at that area. But they have this courage to see new life. Unfortunately, some political people using this to, like discrediting these young people who find a new life. So if I make this all come together, this is the time where we must adopt this paradigm shift of fraternity. We need to use this to make Timor-Leste face a new horizon by seeing politically, socially, culturally, and economically. This is the big challenge which I put very briefly. Next, please. The slide. Now, if you put the question for future, what can we do in Timor-Leste? I would say the first step, as the president already chose, is education. In fact, we have this basic law of education, number 14, 2008. If I read this law, we have very high idea about the education. I would say that we have this real utopia. And the second, president takes very courage to campaign to increase the state budget for education till to 20%. I would say this is revolutionary path. In past time, we only have 5 to 7% of education. If the president take this 20, we just fly to another planet. Now, the point is that what can we do with this law and this huge amount of percentage of the budget? President now take the path. Maybe we will visit Indonesia to catch up with Nahdlatul Ulama and with Muhammadiyah and with also the Catholic Church in Indonesia to say, please, what can, give a hand with us? Since we are Timor-Leste and Indonesia is neighbor. This is one utopia. The second one, we face, the meeting between civic economy and blue economy. Bear in mind that Timor-Leste, 20% only is land and 75% is sea. I say that civic economy, when our constitution acknowledges three ways of dealing with economy. There's a public sector, private sector, and cooperative sector. Civic economy means that how to combine the investment of these three kinds in order to enhance our economy. Recently, we talked about blue economy, how to provide as much as we can, every training, preparing like human research to deal with this blue economy. In our sea, yes, we have oil and gas. Yesterday, the minister told, the Minister of Economy and Finance told me that within 10 years, our petrol will gone. Now, what can we do within these 10 years to prepare our step to the future? Since all the economical budget, all our economy run by the revenue from the petrol. It is take like 79% till to 8% of our budget based on oil and gas. So we have very challenge in front, very challenge ahead of dealing with civic economy and blue economy. I think President will visit Indonesia, and we will discuss with Indonesia as much as we can to support the way Timor-Leste to redevelop this nation. The last point is that the president insists to safeguard our common home, to see how to deal with our exploration of oil and gas and agriculture. As we know that within 10 years, our petrol and gas will come to the end. And after 10 years, we must face this challenge as a new hope. Next slides, please. Yeah. Why do I take this fraternity is a key point to deal with Indonesia? I take our founding fathers, Nicolau Lobato, and in far right that you see Shanana. In 74-75, this is what Nicolau Lobato said. Assim também somos irmãos do povo da Indonésia. We are brothers of people of Indonesia. This is the way he say in Portuguese. And I provide also the translation in English. Please go to next slide, I will see. Next slides, please. Yeah, this is the translation in English. So too, we are brothers of the people of Indonesia. Brother and neighbors that we are, we will have to live in peace and cooperation with each other. And for that, each one will have to rule in their own house. Now, our position is clear and uncompromising, but comrades, our repudiation of integration in Indonesia and our uncompromising defense of our people's right to independence are in no way intended to signify any hostility towards the broader people of Indonesia. In this respect, we are clear. All people are in solidarity and are brothers of one another. Now, the new president is part of this ancien regime. He opened this door with Indonesia first. It means that we will recollect all what we have in the past time of our history to see that our relation with Indonesia since the beginning was not politic, was not military. We intend to develop our relation with Indonesia as brother. This is very clear statement from one of the strongest men which stand against the invasion of Orde Baru. We leave this experience behind. With this new president, we will open our new path with Indonesia in politically, in economic, in cultural, and in social relation for future in the paradigm, as we call that, fraternity, human fraternity, or in Arabic word, as I know from the document, ukuah insani. This is what from Abu Dhabi, they sent me the message. They said that in the official word in Arabic, it is ukuah insani. That's human fraternity that we want to share with Indonesia for future. This is the new hope with Indonesia. We open as a new case and share to the ASEAN, share to the world that in the past time we have this problem of litigation, of hatred feeling, of killing each other. Now the new generation want to establish this human fraternity or ukuah insani. Next slide. Obrigado means thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Martino, for a very interesting presentation. So if I may to give some sort of summary, we can see that there are several interesting points that Mr. Martino has presented us, like, for example, explaining about the principle of the democracy in Timor-Leste, which is using the separation of power. And also that very interesting point when Mr. Martino explained to us regarding the paradigm shift of the fraternity, and also explaining the several challenges that faced by Timor-Leste, including in the political sector, which has they have the challenge then in order how to the challenge to transferring the power, especially in the context of the pandemic, and also the process of governance itself that which somehow discredit others, and also from the society that there's a lot of social fragmentation that show us that they are easily connected to each other, but it is that they are neighbor but not brothers. And also from the cultural side, explain us about how the cultural value that instead of using it to encouraging people, but somehow using them to terrorizing others. And also for the economic sectors that they try to see the opportunity of the work opportunity on how the young people trying to catch the opportunity by moving abroad, like to work in Australia or like Middle East or like Portugal to catch up with the development and economic possibility. And also very interesting point when Mr. Martino trying to explain us about the future hope for the Timor-Leste, for example, in the sector of education, which the new president trying to invest more in education, we try to increase the budget up to 20% to ensure that Timor-Leste will produce the human resources with educated and skilled for the future development. And also trying to combine like how to combine or collaborate civic economy and also the blue economy, make it more developed in order to bring like the sort of front gate or safeguard to the mining sector such as oil, gas, and also the agriculture to secure their economic for the future hope. And also, okay, and now we move to the next discussion. We have Pak Purwo who will present the context of Indonesia. So Pak Purwo, time is yours. Okay, Pak Purwo, you still mute yourself. Can you please unmute it?
Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for the opportunity. Selamat siang, Pak Martino. Senang bisa, I would say thank you for ukhuwah insaniyah.
Yeah, I'm to learn that.
Like Pak Martino, we are strive for model of democracy for our own. I mean, there are so to speak, international standard of democracy, but international standard is for the dominant democracy, and because we want to have democracy in the way which is also having reliance on natural resources. This is the assignment from the management. So we would like to stress the importance of resilient in natural resources. One minute, I should. Presentasi saya belum masuk ya Mbak ya?
Oh, sudah masuk Pak, tapi kayaknya ini belum full screen ya Pak?
Saya tadi coba share screen. Mana untuk share screen-nya kok?
Ini sudah masuk sebenarnya.
Sudah. Share screen udah kelihatan? Sudah ya? Oke. Okay, sorry. I was not quite sure that I share the screen already. Okay. The topic we are discussing today is democracy at stake. And we are set side by side the Indonesian model of democracy, which has been ongoing so far, and we want to have a look at to the extent the current model of democracy makes us capable to rely on the natural resources. The idea is to seek model of natural resources reliance on democracy. So the model of democracy is what really need to be taken into account, and therefore we need to find model of democracy, because the setting of standard democracy, the liberal democracy, which has been set in place knowingly or unknowingly, are not really reliable in governing the natural resources. I will be talking about this later on. So my speak will be set out into part. One is the analytical tools in order to make sure that the democracy we are talking about are workable to some extent, but not really reliable in making up our dependence on natural resources. So, and on the basis of the tool of analysis, then I will make some comment here and there scatterly, because we haven't have produced comprehensive studies on natural resources reliable on reliability on democracy. What has been discussed so far is democracy is something and natural resources is just one aspect. But we investigate that democracy, the model of democracy, basically actually is the extension of capitalism. Basically, when we talk about freedom, is the freedom to produce and doing voluntary exchange, basically, and then political order. to set it up, then we call it democracy. So if we look at democracy on historical ground in the world economic discourse and economic dynamic, basically democracy we have nowadays is liberal democracy, which also like the accessories of capitalism in the world. So if we are willing enough to make reflection that democracy is basically working on the ground of capitalist way of life, then many things are appearing. And because natural resources is important element of economic development, economic growth, wealth creation, wealth distribution, that we are debating between capitalism and socialism. And we are not necessarily trapped into the debate. What we really mean to do is to have a meaningful way of making sense of democracy. Democracy, therefore, subject to design from each countries, and the model of democracy is what we are looking for. And whatever the model, what we've been thinking is to make sure that our dependence on natural resources are worked out within the notion of democracy, and therefore a lot of assumption we've been take for granted should be under review. For example, Indonesia has been, well, stating it, I mean, Indonesian are proud to be national resources rich country. And to some extent is still yes, but there are a lot of misleading notion within the idea of resource-rich national resource-rich country. If it is so, then can we then, within the system of democratic governance, come up with the idea of social justice? Yes, our dependence on natural resources allows the government to collect huge amount of money, collect some taxes, and then we, for example, have allocated 20% of our national income for education. But is education really well, I mean, developed, given the political commitment to justify to finance? Because there are a lot of well, improper spending. Well, 20% of national revenues are obliged by mandated by the Constitution, but the devil is in the detail of governance, detail of policy making. Therefore, then when we talk about democracy, basically we are taking up the issues of institutional setup to make sure the resources we are collected mostly from natural resources, then transform into funding, and then the outcome is social justice and education and health system and a lot of other aspects of prosperity. Well, to some extent, Indonesia, especially during the Orde Baru, having a lot of dependence on natural resources, especially oil and gas, and the huge amount of funding was successfully financed the education, the health system, and so forth. And therefore, the studies run by experts on the subject saying that Indonesia was great enough to be able to escape from the resource curse. So, well, people are saying that Orde Baru was authoritarian, or some even label it as dictatorship. But the fact is that the way the government collect money and the way the government spend are materialized in terms of producing good education, good welfare, in terms of improvement, not the absolute score. And therefore, then the ability of the so-called authoritarian rule to have good performance in social justice in terms of managing and governing the resources is grateful. And what make it happen is because the contestation among the party was, minimized. And the policy making was run by the technocrats, making use of bureaucracy and the centralistic nature of the governance, according to the standard, international standard, are undemocratic. But in fact, allows Indonesia to avoid the case in Nigeria, like bloody diamond there, because the resources in terms of diamond was making up internal conflict at huge scale. So government then also the ability to transform resources, natural resources, into social justice, and the dependence on technocrats in terms of policy making allows of, so to speak, acceptable ways of governing resources, and therefore the system which rely on the technocrat, the expert, rather than political parties, doing good at that sense. And a lot of infrastructural development was undertaken using a huge amount of money. And yet, then after the reform, after the fall down of Suharto's regime, the ability to focus on developing infrastructure for allowing social justice and economic delivery was absent until recently, when Jokowi, after more than 3 decades, 2 decades, national governments are absent in using strategic resources for strategic infrastructural development. And then the decentralized governance, which meant to be more democratic, apparently are losing sight in terms of making strategic decision, and because of on the name of democracy, on the name of autonomy, local autonomy, and so forth, then we neglected the idea of developing the infrastructure and the like. So then, if we talk about democracy and the internal nature of democracy is policy making, then the policy making is an important aspect in democracy, and we are now in the position of having a review in terms of competence of political parties, how to govern the resources. And apparently then we also witnessed it, that when competition among parties are ongoing, then rent-seeking process from natural resources endowment are prevalent, and therefore then the problem of entrusting political parties are then making Indonesian natural resources governance suffering. And because the idea of transferring resources into social justice are not really fit with the contestative nature of political parties, and political parties are not really well equipped to be policymaker or policy architecture. Okay, so if we want to make democracy politically significant, and also resources as the element that we have to take into account very seriously, then we have to talk democracy beyond the electoral vision. Well, electoral democracy is necessity, but we must not focusing on the electoralism, because there are a lot of problem on democracy derived from contestation among the political parties or contesting nature of governance. And if we want to show the natural resources side of democracy, then we have to focus in terms of policy making. So by seeking or digging down the democracy beyond electoral democracy, more substantive notion of democracy on the table, and then we can look around how policy making has been ongoing. And this is the way we understand the democracy in more resilient nature for governing resources. So what really important is model of natural resources governance. This is the idea which we seek to exercise, and how then institutionalization of democracy comes about, and the link between the two are really what really at stake. Okay, why I need to talk this issue? Because the political aspect of natural resources governance are embedded in the way we treat or we conceptualize or understand our nature. On the name of capitalism, on the name of utilitarianism and economics, then we selectively and treat nature into certain ways, and then nature then become natural resources. What making valuable is the utility, not the sovereignty, the mighty of the nature. And this a lot of sacrificing ongoing when we treat nature simply on the economically viable means, and the way to do so is to fit the capitalism. Even human being then become human resources, because then human are become the slave of capitalism. And this is the way we think about democracy. And therefore, then, okay, the fact is that we are dependent on natural resources to provide the funding for government, and we need to govern the process seriously. Then what really matters is natural resources governance, and then the quality of governance are dependent on the quality of democracy. But what is the political? The political is that in many ways, what natural resources governance require democracy in the first place. If we are undemocratic in our thinking, then the resources is not governed properly, And governance in that sense is not only elections, not only seeking a leader. And if we set this into account, then we have to treat our nature in more respect, and then we have to apply like the natural resources management. We call it the precautionary principle and so forth. And then nature should be the source of energy. Like when we are talking about energy nowadays, we have a limit of fossil energy. We are depleting our planet to the use of hydrocarbon energy. And therefore, then we have to treat our suns, for example, as a source of energy, not only natural resources, because there are a lot of energy derived from sun, for example. And therefore, then we have to think the way we look at things, and then we have to use the idea of life support system rather than natural resources. So that the life of human being, the humanity, is important, not only from the economic point of view. And when we look at this, then the quality of natural resources governance dependent on democracy. Then, and on the other hand, we have to treat resources differently, more innovatively, and then we have to transform the model of governance. So the back and forth idea are really political. Okay, the study nowadays has been demonstrated that resource rent are very important source of corruption. Indonesia, with the richness of oil and gas, yes, it feed up the budget, the country's budget, but then it's become point of rent-seeking practices. In many cases, this is prevalent all over the world, and therefore scientifically proven that rent are positively associated with corruption. The sources are there, I noted. And the relationship between rent and corruption depend on the quality of democratic institution. And the way to make the democracy work for the sake of resources is important, but also the resources itself are contributive in making the democracy performing, and the back and forth process is what really matters. Okay, to make sure that natural resources are governed properly, there are international standards or a lot of discourses ongoing. For example, with regard to the reliance on extractive industries, the natural resources index are on offer, and then we have to have a lot of analysis on that to make sure to scrutinize how good is the governance on natural resources. I don't want to go much deeper there, but the fact that the political dynamic are not always dependent, not always governable. For example, when the New Order government was abolished, it was in response to the mob and violence and protests and so forth. So then this political system was collapsed, as we know. But at that time, there are a lot of writing, lot of penjarahan hutan. What was the term? like grabbing forest plantation, and the lack of order make people badly behaving. So the ungovernability of the state make the natural resources ungovernable, and likewise, when the government are acting badly, then there are a lot of riot, a lot of protesting, and so forth. Yet then, democratic governance make effect to resource governance. For example, Donald Trump criticized by his opponent when on the name of making good profit, then he jeopardized their own governance and destroy the credibility of the United States as a reference of democracy. Okay, that's the logic I want to follow now. The next presentation is the score we have, for example, from the National Resources Governance Index. Indonesia ranked at the top level. There are 3 categories. So the resource governance measuring on the name of, by looking at the extractive industry, mainly mining, not that bad. The governance index are good, and the index, as I said earlier, scoring on the value realization, revenue management, and enabling environment. The most difficult element is enabling environment, and the standards are not that bad. Well, the World Bank data also suggests that the rate of poverty are decreasing, and then the resources in principle has been contributing because of the certain type of management or governance ongoing. The performance in reducing poverty are not really bad, though still high in terms of numbers. The dependence on alternative energy as now on the big agenda, the international agenda, are still low. Though at some point Indonesia was great, and in terms of energy, previously Indonesia was relying on rent, on coal. Nowadays, previously on mining. Nowadays, more reliant on coal. So, given the difference on type of resources the government are relying, then good mining practices according to the subject are important. And so the type of resources require certain type of management because of the ecological behavior have to be taken into account. As the oil rent are now decreasing, the Indonesia now not anymore exporting oil, and the oil sell on the market are the subsidized on the one hand, but relying on the global market. and therefore then the carefulness of government in setting up price, and then the ability of the government to make sure that the politics on the name of contesting among parties are not entrapped into the bad practice because of the inability of capitalist system to control themselves. So if Indonesia, given the model of governance which not necessarily comply to the standard libertarian or standard liberal democracy, able to have governance on resources so far, I mean, good in the one hand, and therefore then the ability to seek a model to make sure that the resources we have making the longest value added, making the furthest outcome is important. Secondly, if the model of democracy are then subject to interpretation, subject to our own designing, we need to take lessons from China. China now become, well, maybe the most second dominant country in the world, equally large, like Indonesia and United States, and China now having a lot of innovation because they are avoiding the liberal trap, avoiding the capitalist trap. Capitalism are becoming the option of China. China no longer communist because China now capitalist. But the way the capitalist...
I just want to highlight several points that Pak Purwo has delivered during the presentation, that actually Indonesia still has like a high reliance on natural resources, and somehow it's also influence on how the government try to set up the democracy, what kind of path of democracy that we try to bring. And also because of the richness natural resources, it also brings us into the several challenges that included that how the government will collect the budgeting, and also whether or not that the government will be able to we have to make the budget spending in a proper way. And also that we can see that the natural resources reliance really shown during the era of Orde Baru or the lead of President Suharto, that we had the huge dependence, especially in the mining sector, oil and also gas mining sector. And also that there's a lot of comment that says that during the era of Suharto, the degree of democracy is really low, or we can say that it's authoritarian, but somehow the government has managed to allocate the budget in order to build infrastructure and also in education, but somehow that it shows that even though the degree of democracy is still low, but somehow the government managed to allocate the income. And also that somehow it fails to be addressed after the post Suharto era, even that we have more sort of more democratic governance. And also in order to having the better resource management, we have to see that beyond the electoral democracy, it's more into the substantial democracy, which has the value of natural resource governance, that which says that in order to achieve the natural resources governance, we need to have the good democratic governance. And also in the end, Mr. Pak Purwo's presentation also conclude by the assessment of democracy in Indonesia, that one of the resource is the resource government index that show Indonesia has on the that shows that Indonesia has the good satisfactory numbers, that And it shows that from the value realization and also revenue management, which is like not bad, seeing how our government try to manage its democracy in reliance to natural resources. And then and now I think that now we already have several, I would say, the short discussion in the chat box here. So I think that it is better for us to move into the Q&A session now. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have a question, you can raise your hand using the function button in the bottom part of your Zoom screen, or just type down the question in the chat box, like some of your friends here. And I already see that there's a question from Dimas Hatta, which asks Mr. Martino that say, how big is the impact of oil and gas reliance to the quality of the politics and democracy in Timor-Leste? I think what Timor-Leste situation right now had is the symptom of the resource first. And we already see that Mr. Martino trying to give us like the brief explanation here, but I think Mr. Martino, could you please like explain more to us here so that we can have a better understanding, or like you can give us the broader explanation, so maybe some of us here as the participant can have like a follow-up question for the further discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alia. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Purwo for his very insightful presentation. What I can catch from this is like you have a certain academic and intellectual autonomy to address such a, like a very systematic presentation how to deal with natural resource, which this is my start point where that our problem here in Timor-Leste is that we talk more political rather than technical. So I would take that presentation of Mr. Santoso to answer to my brother Hatta, that Timor-Leste is actually, as I mentioned before, 79% of state budget depend upon, oil and gas. And according to the prediction, by next 10 years, our natural resource will exhausted. Now, facing that situation, the question is that any future after like boom of petrol and gas, which is a very big question. The second point which I want to put as like information, I don't want to compare Timor-Leste with Indonesia. For only our population, maybe we only count ourselves with Sragen or maybe like only Klaten. The whole nation, we have 1.3 million. So it's only one kecamatan in Indonesia or in Jogja, I don't know. But we have like $2 billion for our annual budget. For that amount, you compare with Atambua, which is our very close neighbor. It is very, very, very unfair to predict as how much money we spend every year, and the fact of what we get as like return to Timor-Leste is nearly zero. I agree with you in Suharto time. Of course, in Timor-Leste, if you mention Suharto, it's like go to neck. But to be honest, Timor-Leste was developed in 20 years because of Orde Baru. So many people were sent to Java and Bali for upgrade their educational degree. But after return, all those which were educated in Indonesia, we are dealing more with politics rather than technique. Unfortunately, this is the fact. And since we have that lack of human resource, which dealing with our natural resource, we send our students to take course in Indonesia, in the United States, in Australia, in Japan, in Korea. And when we come back, it is like Timor-Leste already dominated by the, how do you say that, this big corporation, international corporation, which put all their finger into our natural resource in Timor Sea. So now we are trying how to get our independence on our sea. We already, overcome the battle to gain our land. For 500 years under Portuguese domination, for 24 years unfortunate with our brothers and sisters of Indonesia. Now we start the new. Of course, people like you, maybe you will show this goodwill, political goodwill in terms of academic and intellectual. But those which come to work in Timor-Leste, from Australia, from Portugal, they are less care to whether Timor-Leste will be, become a developed country or remain as an underdeveloped country. The challenge is very big. Now, the new president try to develop a neighborhood with Indonesia, with Australia, with Japan, in order to, with Singapore and Malaysia and ASEAN et al., how to enhance the new era of development. Like the old fashion is now going. Ramos Horta is like under natural law. Maybe in Indonesia you say hukum kodrat, which I think next 5 years or 10 years at most, God will solve his problem with Shanana, with Al-Katiri. But afterwards, what can we do? So this is the moment which we want to develop. One thing, the peaceful and brotherhood with Indonesia, since you put in the consideration as Ermalindo put in the chat, with Dili, Kupang, and Dawit. But I'm not very, very optimistic with this, since the dealing with Kupang must be here the call from Jakarta. While Timor-Leste stay alone, Kupang is depend to Jakarta. Now depend on this big corporation to determine. So I think so many things are doing, but many more things must be projected for future. And I think President Ramos Horta is taking this leading initiative to first official visit to Jakarta to meet President Jokowi, since we see that Jokowi put so many projects in the border between Timor-Leste and Timor Occidental, between Maliana, Okusi, and Atambua, in a way that we must find a new paradigm, which we call that, I repeat again, we start with the Ukuwa Insani, with Indonesia, forget the past time, let us develop the future. Depend much more with Indonesia in educational system and in agriculture. this is very small. This is very small country with only 14,000, something like that, 14,700 kilometers square, with the population of 1.3 million. We only, Timor-Leste, we only need one camat from Yogyakarta, rather than one president, one prime minister, one president of parliament, and a huge of big democratic nation. But once again, it is, for me, is very helpful and very prospectful to always open up our relation with Indonesia as our closest neighbor, as our closest brother and sister anyway. So rather than give a clear answer technically, which I owe very much to Mr. Santoso, I would say that we are at the beginning. As I said, we are in the beginning to sprint for, like in Indonesian time, we learned from Habibie, lepas landas. Timor-Leste still develop the landasan and no plane to lepas landas, so just forget about it. We need more endorsement from our neighbor. Maybe this is roughly a long answer which I provide to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Martino. I think it's also answered the question that I given from Mr. Ermalindo, if I was mistaken. Yeah, okay, and now, is there any other question from the participant here? Okay, I think that I didn't see any raised hand here, but I also received the question that directly to me. I think it's both for Pak Purwo and also Mr. Martino. There is one question which says, in terms of democracy, how is the role of civil society organization somehow participate or getting involved in the natural resource government scheme? So it's like sort of, what is the civil society role in involving themselves in the process of natural resource management, or trying to advocate the society aspiration, like especially for those who has like directly impact with the natural resources activities, something like that. Thank you. Probably Pak Purwo, we can start to answer the question, and then we will move to Mr. Martino later. Thank you.
What was the question?
The role of the civil society organization on natural resource governance, Pak.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the role is very important, and the partnership between the government and civil society is what really at stake, because in the past, when we talk about civil society, we have to have adversarial relationships, defeating one another. But in terms of natural resources, what we have been ongoing is different. For example, when we talk about natural resources governance, and then we focus on the extractive industry, university is the important civil society activism, because it requires high technology, it requires understanding of large scale, high tech, and risky business. And ordinary activists on the street are unable to cope with that. So then selective engagement of civil society, because the area is important, strategic. And therefore then the ability of civil society to think strategically, to match up with the business, because in this regard, civil society have to go hand in hand, or monitoring or assessing business practices, for example. So National Resources Institute and HGI has to be in partnership with our department and doing a lot of studies. And because we have to produce a policy brief, which makes sense to government and also makes sense to business. And this is the kind of relationship. Now, if we are stuck with the idea of like existential engagement, life or death, then there's not the way the engagement. But there are a lot of role in the grassroots to encourage. This is then the ordinary or university based, student-based activism are important. And the idea of Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama, as Pak Martino mentioned several times, is very important. Muhammadiyah nowadays reviving or resetting up the theology. In the past, the theology of Al-Ma'un, to give the charity, is the doctrine of Muhammadiyah. Now there has been engagement in terms of national resources engagement, and likewise in Nahdlatul Ulama side we have so many pesantren, and pesantren are having a great culture in nurturing nature on agriculture and local wisdom and so forth. And now the role is very important. But to engage in setting up new ways of thinking is what really important. Not only to defeat the government or to show the heroic activism. For example, this is the real case of our teaching staff. Mbak Aziza now is doing her PhD on natural resources governance, especially waste management. I provoke her, why don't you take the side of informality of governance, and then how the local culture, she's still struggling how to link the local culture of Jogja, the notions of wisdom of Sultan and Kraton and so forth are important. And this is the aspect that government keep failing to do. And therefore, then new innovative way of doing things is important. Now, let me usul ke Pak Martin. I agree that we have to have a strategic ways of managing resources like oil from Timor-Leste. And the way to do so is to devote on the human resources development. I agree with that. But I'm having an opinion in terms of detail of doing things. If the way we send our youngsters to study overseas without agenda, then everything, everybody think everything else, and then lack of focus. If this is a matter of resources governance using the oil, revenue from oil to make enduring development in the future, then we have to make reference to other countries such as Norway having a good record in how to use endowment funds and also taking up the green issues and so forth. So then the idea of resources which has been taken nowadays has to be transformed into the endowment fund and so forth. So then there should be a guidance from the government to make reference and like something like a policy transfer or something, getting lesson learned from Norwegia in terms of endowment fund and reproduce the saving from that. But in terms of technology, we have to make reference to Israel. Indonesia has problem to communicate with Israel, but I don't think that Timor-Leste has a problem. Israel having similar landscape to Timor-Leste in terms of trade, in terms of size, but because of the history of Israel, Jewish history, they have linkages to experts all over the world, and they become a master in terms of technology for agriculture. So then, if we take a lesson from Israel in terms of strategic of technological development and develop agricultural aspect, lesson drawing from that. So then the strategy of human development, human resources development should be well focused. Otherwise, everybody think nonsense or so dispersed, and then therefore the resources are gone. In terms of city-state, how to get the modernity, then we have to learn from Singapore, for example. I understand you have studied, we have people there, but then a lesson drawing should be important lesson, because this is what government in Indonesia was failing, because we don't have agenda when we set student to go abroad. When I was in London, I participated in discussion with people from some of the countries. From Japan, I was surprised. He said, well, my ancestor was studying overseas, and when they were studying in England, they was having a specific assignment. Do this, take this, that, pick up, and then we have practices. And then our colleague from Korea said, okay, my grandfather used to study abroad, and then the government asked us to buy 2 sets of trains, and 1 train was in operation. The other train is to dismantle for research, for example. So there should be specific guidance in terms of using money, and there should be something else after the study. This is the failure of Indonesia in the past, and I don't want. Timor-Leste repeating the same problem. I used to study in England, but there was no assignment what to study from an Indonesian government, even though I spent debt money. I used a loan, but there was no guidance of using loans, because the one who paid the loans are the governments, and I am not paying the loan, because the loan are having different logic with the private loan. So this is the strategic ideas of managing strategic resources, to have specific agenda. Otherwise, the money was spent and nothing left. I don't know how to advise the collaboration with Kupang. I understand that there are a lot of problems on the ground. We are still struggling with refugees after so many years, and I don't know whether the border development are feasible. But I agree that the brotherhood between President Volta and President Jokowi is important, and joint venture, joint collaboration. Like in the past, people from Gajah Mada are taking part in University Universitas Timor Timur. But nowadays we don't have formal collaboration, and if that's the historical linkages revived, there are a lot of things we can do. This is the detail of human resource development in order to make a wise use of and strategic use of managing human resources to be able to make best use of natural resources. This is just private imagination I have in mind because of my evaluation on Indonesian strategy on human resources. It's just go abroad and bring the certificates. But the people from other country, okay, government has the agenda, do this, that, and then we pick this. If this is feasible, I don't know, but this is what I have in mind when I take attention to Pak Martin's idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pak Purwo, for very insightful information. Now, I think it's the same question goes to Pak Martino, still with the same question regarding the role of the civil society organization, probably in Timor-Leste, on how they're getting involved in the resource management there, or maybe in trying to formulating the blue economy, or trying to decrease the dependence on the oil and gas dependence in Timor-Leste. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you once more for Mr. I will say that Senor Santoso. I would say, first of all, in Timor-Leste, a few days ago, President talked with me and he said that enough with civil society, because during these 20 years, civil society played such an important role in Timor-Leste, but the way they every time to do is that training, conference, civic education, like this for 20 years. Every time you see that. Once a few days ago, when I and the president received some organization came and he just said that I don't want to hear about the training and seminar and whatever. I want the real to do what? That's the concrete, like grounding work. Regarding regarding the natural resource, there are 2 or 3 civil society organization here in Timor-Leste. Once they are in, the leading leader in civil society, they talk very critical and very with their expertise. But when they join political party, they become Secretary of State, they become minister, they become member of parliament, they just forget what they said before. And nowadays they change, the language, they change the attitude, they change the approach. So for me, I think that civil society in Timor-Leste need to reflect and to readdress critically their point to how to bring this nation for future. But Signorina Sada, Aliyah, I would say one thing that the question must be raised, the role of religions. And I'm quite disagree with Mr. Santoso that university is part of civil society. As a professor in university, I would say that I don't want to submit with the civil. University and religion, for me, I personally, I believe that we have the specific autonomy and we have the specific vocation. Let me put in another way. As I appreciate you, Mr. Hatta or Mr. Santosa, that this is the way the intellectual, the professor, the lecturer must do, is that to guide new generation to think critically about economic, society, politics, and everything. Since we become a part of civil society and we just depend to whether this charity plan endorse us, then after that, they just wash their hands. Our experience in Timor-Leste is that so many organizations came to provide scholarship to our people, and they do the charity. They send our young people to study in Portugal, in England, in Korea, in Japan, in Indonesia, in Australia. And after that, turning back to Timor-Leste, they are jobless. Because why? We have this very, very critical of human resource management. Our government never provide our own funding. Say, for instance, we need a very special people which study on oil and gas. We just send them to study, but they go to study law, they go to study some kind of political management, and lack of technical understanding of how dealing with our natural resource. In a way that if you go to like our Timor Sea, all the technical expertise are from Portugal, from Australia, from Japan, and from Australia, or from United States. Of course, they will give advice up to how much, the stakeholder give them. If the business say like this, they will give, like unfair advice, people of Timor-Leste, mostly for our leader, to take decision wrongly. 20 years ago, Mr. Al-Ghatiri go to sign agreement with Australia, but we lost our sovereignty for 50 years. We cannot deal with our maritime boundary. Now, after Shanana hand over the power, he renegotiate our maritime boundary. So we still don't have this sovereignty of bargaining our economical interest in Timor Sea. Now, if my friend here, Jean Obere, says that this October, Bayu Undang will suck off, then where we will go? We still negotiating for greater sunrise. Why do that much delay? Because we don't have expertise with autonomy and with nationalism to enhance our Timor-Leste's interest. We just provide expertise to who paid more. If you pay less, I will work to those pay more. This is very real big problem in Timor-Leste. In this way, I think university and also government in Timor-Leste, mostly Minister of Education, must address the new policy for human resource management. President of Republic, the new President of Republic, Dr. Ramos Horta, appointed me to work with him under this line. And I already told to the president, please, we have to discuss very seriously for managing our human resource. Otherwise, one generation will go on. Our educational system here is not Indonesia, is not Timor-Leste, is not Australia, is not Portugal, is not whatever. by the end, I remember what the late Abdul Rahman Wahid said, that our system is sistem bukan-bukan. Bukan Indonesia, bukan Timor-Leste, bukan Australia, Portugal, bukan Jepang, dan our educational system is, Gus Dur said that, system yang bukan-bukan. So far, we don't have really what system we want to adopt in Timor-Leste. That's incredible. So educational parties, things which we want to be a melting spot, how to enhance and how to sprint our development for next 20 years, I mean. For the other hand, natural resource, now in Timor-Leste, after we signed the document Ukhuwah Insani from Abu Dhabi, I hope that next 2 weeks we will travel to Jakarta. We will meet Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama, how to establish the framework with Catholic Church, with Protestant Church, to take religion as a new source to handle that new crisis. So what can religion offer for the, for the human natural resource crisis in future? Not only Indonesia, we learn from Indonesia, of course, but also Timor-Leste alone. What can we do? So the president wants that the Uni Emirate Arab, from Kuwait, from Iraq, and of course from Israel. This, we try to open everything, but also to our neighbor, mostly to Indonesia, Australia, and Malaysia, to deal with this. But all the religious leaders come to speak out, to articulate their critical point. How we don't want to be an opposition to the government. They are our brother. They are Muslim. They are Catholic. They are Protestant. They are part of us. It is pointless if we start to use like oppositional and hated speech in the politics. What we need in Ukhuwah Insani is using language of fraternity, language of saudara. In Indonesia, always when you talk in the parliament, you say saudara presiden, saudara anggota DPR, you use that saudara. Let us bring that to Ukhuwah Insani. That's why my is how to, to work out as a brother sister.
I think Mr. Martino has some kind of connection problem here, that then we cannot hear anything from him anymore. Okay, I think he's dropping out. So I think maybe we can recap the discussion first, and maybe if later Mr. Martino has to our room and has some more points, we can accommodate it. But I think, okay, he's back. Mr. Martino, can you hear us? Mr. Martino, I think, okay. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I say? Can I speak now?
Yeah. Yes. Sure.
I just come to the finish. I want to thank Mr. Mr. Santoso for very delightful suggestion that we take reference from Norwegia. Actually, it is. We run our petrol fund based on a system which we adopt from Norwegia. But sometimes you see the politician, I don't want to say this word when I study in Jakarta, I learned this word, maruk, want to bite more. So the law is very clear, but since you become a politician, you are very hungry. Then in Jakarta, you said maruk law. So this political maruk, it doesn't work in Timor-Leste. The law is very clear, but sometimes this is abuse of law that they jump beyond the limits of the law. And sometimes it happens in Timor-Leste, but it is good that we always fight against that. Secondly, of course, we learn from Israel. We send our people for cultural training there and come back. They start, like in my organization in my hometown, we are working there. And of course, with Singapore, we go everywhere to learn, but we come back, there is nowhere that we can apply what we learn. That is our problem. That depends. In Timor-Leste, we talk more about politics rather than economy and development. Everybody, every time, talk about politics, and they just feed up with themselves with politics and forget that they go back home, they need to eat. And lastly, through this human fraternity, I'm developing with the president. I mean, the president of Republic asked me to develop, like brotherhood and sisterhood with Timor of Indonesia. We want to share to Indonesia, and from Indonesia, we want to share to the world that one island, two nations. We can live together side by side in peaceful, in brotherhood. And in this small land, we have three religions: Catholic, Protestant, and Islam. In another side, there's the biggest number is Protestant, then Catholic, then Islam. We want this Timor-Leste won't go to Muhammadiyah and NU. We want that these two biggest organizations in Indonesia, indeed in the world, to like a father guide the son to go through this critical moment. So I think if I go to Jakarta, I will let you know that maybe we cross in the path. I hear that president want to go to Yogyakarta to meet with Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama in Yogyakarta or in Jakarta, I don't know, but I will see within this story. If go to Yogyakarta, I will let you know. So we have a coffee meeting. Thank you very much for you all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Martino. And I think it also has covered the comment from the Mr. Jano regarding the Bayu Udan project in Timor Sea. And also, I think because we already running out of time, it's almost 3 p.m. Jakarta time now. So I think we can call the discussion today. And I would like to say apologize for the audience if you have some more questions for both of our speakers. We would like to say sorry because we cannot accommodate for today. But you can always reach us to our social media or join us for the further Democracy at Stake discussion series. And okay, so I think for now, I would like to conclude the discussion. And for both the case of Indonesia and Timor-Leste, we can see that how both countries still try to find what is the best form of the democracy that should with the model of the country, and what is the model of the democracy that actually able to provide comprehensive solution both for the natural resource management and also maintain the social cohesion and try to manage the potential of conflict. And also regarding for the natural resources itself, we can see that for both country, Indonesia and Timor-Leste, trying to find the better alternative or like the more creative and also innovative economy, or that such as the creative economy itself, or like the blue economy, or like service economy, in order to try to decrease the reliance or the dependence to natural resources such as the oil and also the gas themselves. And now I think that's all for our discussion today. I would like to say thank you again for all the participants for joining our discussion today, and I would like to address special thanks for both our speaker, Mr. Purwo, and also Mr. Martino, for very insightful and very important discussion and information for us today. And I believe that we all learned so much more new for our future study and stuff. Okay, and I think that's all for our discussion today. Again, thank you. Yeah, I think we can end the discussion. Thank you. See you all very soon. Take care. Thank you. Good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pak Martino,
Thank
kalau
you.
ke
Thank you,
Jogja mampir.
everyone.
Ya, nanti minum kopi. Kalau
Kita
jadi
bisa
ke
ngopi.
Jogja, kita ngopi di Malioboro.
Iya. Saya juga pengurus NU, Pak. Jadi kalau ke Jogja saya bisa.
Ya, nanti saya
sebelumnya ikut mendirikan Universitas Nahdlatul Ulama di Jogja, sehingga saya NU akademik, tetapi juga aktivis civil society.
Recording
Jadi
stopped.
saya menganut tiga-tiganya.
Ya.
Ada 3 baju yang saya bisa pakai.
Ya. Saya di Timor-Leste tidak ada Kementerian Agama dan tidak akan ada. Tapi Presiden menugaskan saya untuk